Hi, with APISIX and Auth0 you can implement OIDC, OpenID Connect based authentication method to protect your APIs and enable single sign-on. In this video tutorial, I will show you how to integrate APISIX with Auth0 using two authentication approaches. Authenticating with user credentials, which means just with login pages, and authenticating with access token and the header of the request, which we call client credentials flow, which means the machine-to-machine communication happens in the second case. Apache APISIX Gateway has a library of plugins that provide simple ways to implement the best known and the most widely used authentication methods. Here are some of the commonly used ones like basic authentication, key authentication, Auth2 authentication like JWT, and LDAP authentication for advanced authentication scenarios, and also OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect is a simple identity layer on the top of the Auth2 protocol. It allows clients to verify the identity of end users or APIs based on the authentication performed by the identity provider. Auth0 is one of such identity provider service which leverages mostly known identity industry standards. Auth0 provides a graphical interface such as login pages that can be customized with your own branding and offers many sign-on options such as by email, social logins, passwordless authentication, biometric logins or one-time passwords, and many other options. This diagram shows how the authentication flow works. Assume that your API consumer sends a request with their credential to APISIX Gateway, and Gateway forwards the credential to Auth0, which returns tokens back to the gateway, and APISIX can route the request with the access token to the protected resources behind the API gateway. You can also follow easily step by step how to set up a single sign-on with Auth0 on the APISIX documentation. You can navigate to API 7.9. Under docs you can find authentication section with how-to guides and navigate and open setup SSO with Auth0. There are some prerequisites before we get started. Make sure that you have Docker installed on your machine, and we're going to use curl commands to send requests to the service validation and configure APISIX features. Start with creating a new account on Auth0. If you don't have one, just navigate and open Auth0 portal. You can sign up here. I assume that you have also Auth0 account. In my case, I have already created one. After you will log in to the Auth0 console. This console provides easy way to configure authentication with several authentication methods. So we will start by clicking on the applications and creating the new Auth0 API. In my case, everything is already set it up. Make sure that you have created new API with any name. I give this name APISIX client credentials, which is just identifier. Identifier can be anything. Once API is created, click on the machine-to-machine applications tab. You should see test application automatically created by the Auth0, which is authorized to access the API, as you can see here, with a specific client ID. Click on APISIX client credentials test application, and it will bring you to the application page. It is our test application, and we'll configure some application settings. Scroll down to the application URIs and make sure that you add the callback URLs to the allowed callback URL section. This is the address that we test application to redirect the users after our users successfully authenticated with Auth0. Next, at the bottom of the same page, expand advanced settings and select the ground types tab and check on the authorization code and the client credentials, and then just click on save changes. Scroll up to the basic information section. On the same page, find the domain, client ID and client secret of the application. As you can see, I have client ID and client secret and domain, and just keep this information with you, we're gonna use this domain client ID and client secret for configuring APISIX OpenID Connect plugin. Now our app is ready to use and our job is finished on the Auth0 side. You can open your now terminal and just save this Auth domain and client ID and client secret to the environment variables so that we can reuse them on later on. I'm just saving all these environment variables after I retrieved this information from the Auth0 console. In the second part, we need to install APISIX. You can open the Getting Started guide and it provides you an easy way to install the APISIX. You can simply copy this as a quick start script and run it on your terminal. When successfully it's finished, you will see this sort of message saying that APISIX is ready. We can also validate if APISIX is responding just by copying this command, control command, and if everything is okay, you will get the following response from APISIX, which means APISIX is now installed and is up and running. Again, do a test once again. As you can see, it is getting response and with a version of APISIX. To configure APISIX, we need to create a route with the ODC plugin enabled that forwards the client request to the HTTP bin and just a mock API service with just public HTTP request and response. For example, the route, if you have anything/anything of HTTP pin, it returns the everything you are requesting in a JSON body or just in the methods or arguments or in the headers. So now you can just copy the following curl command to create a route and enable ODC OpenID Connect plugin. Before that, I can explain shortly what are these client ID and secret and the discovery. As you can see, like client ID, that's the same client ID we save it to the environment variable together with the secret, and we are using the Auth0 domain to set up the OpenID configuration metadata endpoint. It is very common approach for any identity providers. If you, for example, replace this Auth domain to some other identity provider domains, it should work again. And make sure that here the direct URL also we are specifying the same as we set on Auth0 console with a /anything/callback. Now I will copy now I simply copy the curl command and jump back to my terminal and paste it here to run this curl command. As you can see, the APISIX responds successfully, which means we have already created the route with our ODC plugin enabled. As you can see, with simple steps, everything is done now on APISIX side. We can test it out. First, we will test the authentication flow with the simple user credentials. To do so, you can just navigate to this URL in your browser. You should be redirected to the Auth0 login page. Here we go. And after you log in with your credentials, if it's successful, the request will be simply forwarded back to our upstream service. If you remember, our upstream service was just a mock API service called HTTP bin. You can give it a try. Second authentication flow is with the client credentials, which means it involves just service-to-service application exchanging information like credentials, whereas there is no any user involved and it's not interactive, right? And to enable and test this flow, first we need to update our existing ODC plugin we created to also allow only bearer token requests, which means it can accept also in the header JWT plugin. Let's update our existing route by jumping back to the terminal, and if you copy and paste to the terminal this call command, you will get successful response. We can test it by obtaining access token for the APISIX client credential, which is our test application. You can run another call command to send directly the request to the auth0 / token endpoint, which a client ID, client secret, and the identifier and the grant type of client credentials. If you press enter, you should get your access token back. Here we go. As you can see, we have access token in place. Now to use this access token later on, I need to also save it to the environment variable. I can just do something like that and click enter. Now access token is now inside the environment variables. The final step is to send the request to the route with this valid access token. I can just bring another call command to simulate the API request to the /anything/test endpoint. If I click on that, you will get HTTP 200 OK, and which means which verified that API call was authorized. And then as you can see, there are the same access token we had, and also some additional the API headers are put by the APISIX gateway. That's how we simply tested our two different authentication flows. You can also discover other APISIX supports the integration with many other OIDC identity providers such as Keycloak. There are also examples. You can have a look. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about APISIX, and please subscribe to our channel, click on the bell to receive notifications about new videos.